so many things to say, so many things to introduce, first of all, as a prelude to the study of Plato, and then to Aristotle, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to go for Aristotle in this short time. In fact, I would pay my homage to my teachers before I begin this, because I would never have been in this position if I had not worked with my teachers in Calcutta University, especially those who had a substantial knowledge, not just a kind of peripheral sort of knowledge that as we have, I have, but a substantial knowledge about Greek and Latin studies as a whole, I would say. So therefore I pay my homage to Professor R.K. Sen. Perhaps you had been a short time student of R.K.'s. Yes, R.K. Sen, who knew 3 languages, Greek, Latin, and most interestingly, Arabic. And also Professor P.C. Ghosh, whom you have never seen. Professor P.C. Ghosh also had been a very great stalwart. And there had been so many others, because from all of them, actually, we gathered what I had to gather. And also Father Burdwan, who had been a teacher in a different way, because when I started to work on this subject, I was asked to stop. My teacher told me, you don't work on this, first of all, and don't think about this. First of all, you have to gather some knowledge of primary Greek, primary Latin, otherwise you will not be able to do justice to this subject. So therefore, every Saturday I used to go to Shanti Bhavan, where Father Burdwan used to stay, and he was a great scholar, a real scholar in Greek and Latin language and literature as far as possible. So therefore, these are the people who really made me what poor I am today. But actually they generated the interest in this subject. Now let me just begin. Now before beginning Plato, we have to be clear about certain things. First of all, we should know the meaning of the term Helletic, Helladic, Helladic period. What is Helladic? And this is going to be rather a prehistory to the study of Plato. Actually, Greek ancient history is divided into 3 parts: the early Helladic, the middle Helladic, and the late Helladic. Now the Helladic period begins from 1300 BC, but for this purpose, I would refer to the 3rd stage of the Helladic period, which begins in 2200 BC. In 2200, and this period, this 3rd stage of the Helladic period, early Helladic period, actually begins with 2200 BC and ends with 2000 BC. And it is during this time that Hellas, as it used to be called at that time, there was nothing like Greece. Actually, the invaders who came to Greece began to call it first Hellas, Hellas. And then the Romans, much later, began to call it Greece. Al-Greeki, that is the term that they used, right? So therefore you can see that from 2200 BC to 2000 BC, there was the invasion, and these people used to call themselves Achaeans, 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 or the Hellenist people. Hellenic element ittadi amra boli toli, that means actually this. From this term it has come. The Hellenist people. Maybe the Indo-Europeans, not maybe, surely, the Indo-Europeans, but uncertainly from which origin. People say somewhere from Asia Minor, but that is very debated. So I'm not going into that debate. That is a different kind of debate. But these invaders, and of course the Indo-Iranians, a group of Indo-Iranians actually entered Greece around 2200 BC, and this is the first stage. Helladic period means the Bronze Age, the Bronze Age. Helladic, when we use the term, it refers to the Bronze Age. So it is the early Bronze Age, 2200 BC to 2000 BC. And during this time, we find that there was a process of assimilation. The assimilation of the indigenous people and the invading people. And as we know, the Greek indigenous people were called Pelasgians, as Professor Finlay has pointed out, that they were called Pelasgians, but regarding the meaning of the term Pelasgians, there are lots of differences, lots of debates. Because the origin of the term cannot be properly identified. The Pelasgoi, the Pelasgoi, whatever it is. But the idea still seems to be very uncertain. But scholars later on have decided, as Professor Finlay has also said, that Pelasgians mean the people near the sea, or the seafaring people. Actually, you know, Greece has always been, in ancient times, has been actually a thalassocracy. Thalasso means the sea. It was the command of the sea. It was always within the command of the sea, the Mediterranean and all that. So therefore, this seems to be a very significant aspect, that the early period, this early Helladic period, was associated only with assimilation of the invading race and the indigenous people, the Pelasgians and the Achaeans or the Hellenic people. I'm not going into the details because that is not important here, but in the middle Helladic period, in the middle Bronze Age, we find several developments. For instance, the use of horse. Actually, horse came to dominate the war fields from this time, and also the wheel-made potteries. The wheel-made potteries were not known to the early Helladic period. That's why the remains, whatever we have from the early Helladic period, are very rough, not smooth, because there was no system of the wheel-run potteries. And there have been several others, and at the same time, in the middle Helladic period, we find the system of fortification of towns. The towns began to be fortified. And as it was in the case of Troy also, in Turkey, now modern Turkey. So therefore, these were some of the important achievements, but most important was the art of writing the language, the Greek language, original Greek language, which you don't know. The original Greek language, I'm coming to you, coming to address this in a short while. They began to write the Greek language and began to, there was no poetry, not at all, but there had been different kinds of treaties, different kinds of records, etc. And this period covers 2000 to 1550 BC, all BC period. So I don't have to mention all the time BC, because this is all BC periods. So it is from 2000 to 1550. So during this time, all such developments were made. The Mycenaean civilization was established by 1500. Now what is this Mycenaean civilization? If you try to read about Mycenae, then you will have lots of books. For instance, Professor Schliemann's book. Professor Schliemann has written extensively on the lost city of Mycenae and the famous Lion Gate, the gate of Agamemnon. It was in Mycenae that Agamemnon was based. And in fact, you know, but there had been problems gradually coming up. During this time, 2000 to 1550, we find the second invasion. But this invasion was not very dangerous, not very destructive. Mainly the Ionians in Asia Minor, the Aeolians, these two particular tribes actually invaded Greece and they got assimilated. So that's why there was not much of a problem because of this invasion, but the culture was getting rich gradually. And the third, I am concerned about, not really concerned, but it will take us to our point, the last phase of the Helladic period, that means the late Helladic period, the late Bronze Age, which starts with 1550 and ends with 1050. This is the, scale of time in terms of the Helladic period. The early Helladic period, 22 BC to 2000 BC, and then middle Helladic period, 2000 to 1550, and the last, the late Helladic period, which covers the time period between 1550 and 1050. So this is the time period, but certain things began to happen by 1200 BC. In 1200 BC, the most warlike tribe, the Dorians, invaded Greece. And the Dorians were famous for their destruction and their internecine struggle to capture the city or the towns, and they entered from the northwestern part of Greece, and they were gradually coming down. At that time, Athens was not a very important city. Athens was not really on the cultural map at that time. So these were easy, and at that time, in fact, the Mycenaean part of Greece, that means the lower part of Greece. If you look at the map of Greece, the ancient map of Greece, you will be able to see that there are very clearly two parts of this country. The upper part of Greece, where we find Athens and other cities, and the lower part actually shows Sparta, Argos, and Argos actually is the most important city at that time because it was ruled by King Agamemnon, and Agamemnon and all other city-states. Agamemnon was the king of Argos, and Argos along with all other city-states in the lower part of Greece, mainland Greece, began to be threatened by this attack of the Dorians in 1200 BC. And therefore actually they wanted to save their city-states. একটা কথা বলে নিই যে নেশনহুড বলে কিছু ছিল না। These were all city-states like India, যেমন আমাদের ষোড়শ মহাজনপদ যেমন ছিল, It's very much like that. These were all city-states, all independent, all free, but they had to work under the leadership of someone. So that will come gradually. Now in this ancient history, it was Argos which used to rule all other city-states indirectly. And so therefore all the city-states actually established a confederation and they attacked Troy in order to restock their empty treasury, as Professor G.S. Card points out. So Professor G.S. Card points out that they actually invade Troy in order to, somehow pay money to the soldiers who will fight against the Dorian tribes and all that. So therefore, they fought this battle against the Trojans, and it was a very tragic battle. They came back, and nothing really accrued out of this battle. So therefore, not to say much about this, because it's after all not a class of Homer. So therefore, they came back. So therefore, at this point, even in spite of doing all this, they could not really stop the invading tribes, the invading tribe Dorians. And the Dorians captured the whole of Greece. And several things happened. In fact, there had been struggles, there had been destructions everywhere for about a century, and then gradual assimilation. The Dorians began to be assimilated into whatever culture was going on there. And it was in this situation that a new kind of culture was evolving. The original Greek language that I talked about disappeared completely. There was nothing like, they forgot the art of writing. And the Bronze Age also comes to an end, complete end with this battle. Because it was the coming of iron. And iron became coveted than anything else. For instance, if you read Homer's Iliad, in the 18th book, Achilles actually is giving away everything as prize for a race and sports and games. He arranges sports and games. And after it was over, he is giving away prizes to the winners. And then when in Calcutta University I used to teach Homer, and in the early part of my career in Burdwan University I used to teach Homer, and there I was very curious about this. There I find that Achilles gives a lump of iron as prize to one of the winners. So I was asking why? Why not gold if he has to give away metal? Or not other things? Why a lump of iron? Then when I began to, excavate further into this, then I found that iron was more important than anything else. Iron is very much needed for the weapons. And iron was more strong and durable than this bronze and all that. So that's why iron became priceless at that time. So therefore, this was very good, very positive that the Bronze Age is coming to an end, and we find the coming of iron, but they forgot the art of writing, and later on they had to learn it from the Phoenicians. The alphabet that we have now is something derived from the Phoenicians. The original Greek has been lost completely. We don't know anything about that. So nobody can tell us anything about that. But we just know that they had a Greek language. But the language is that, but the alphabets are different. This is something. So therefore, if I write Bengali in English, that thing happens. So therefore, they had the alphabets from the Phoenicians, and the language remains the same. So this is how they had to rediscover a script. And this is still now going. So therefore, it is therefore the story of the rise and fall of the city of Mycenae. Mycenae, which started to rise around 1550 BC, came to be completely destroyed by the Dorian attack in 1200 BC. And the patriotic, if not patriotic, patriotic is a wrong word for this kind of a world. Actually, in order to save themselves, they had to do many things. For instance, attacking Troy and some other things. So therefore, because I tell you that it was a very barbaric sort of a world where we should not go by the principles like virtue, honesty, etc., etc. It was a different kind of world, if you read it properly, if you read it truly. So that's why, that is, whatever virtue, whatever ideologies we find in Homer's epics, is nothing but interpolation. So therefore, let me leave out that, because that's a different subject. But we find that the rise of Mycenae and the fall of Mycenae actually brought about a new kind of transition, a new kind of social system, a new kind of administrative system all over Greece. And as you know, that art of writing was lost, but once again revived with the help of the Phoenicians. And during the Mycenaean period, already trade routes had been established, not only naval trade routes, but also roadways. So that's why we have the distinctive points of transports going through Rhodes Islands, or Cyprus, or Egypt, or Syria, to different parts of that civilized world, right? And now with this kind of background, I'm gradually coming to the 5th century BC, because the entire period, because 9th century BC is normally known as the Dark Age, but historians say that it is dark, it's dark only to us. So that's why we call it Dark Age, because we don't know anything about this. It's not a negative term. Sometimes people think that it's a negative term. As there had been a contention somewhere, I don't remember, Middle Ages. Someone said that Middle Ages is normally considered to be something negative, but it's not negative. Yes, I was inaugurating a book. So there, this idea was, circulated, that when we say that it's something Middle Ages, Moddhajutiyo Byapar, ityadi. But Middle Ages actually, once again, that is a kind of pejorative term. It is normally thought, but it's not. It's a kind of labeling that we are creating. Similarly, Dark Age is not a negative term. Dark Age, it is dark to us. We don't know much about this time. And after this, by 8th century, by 8th to 7th century, because the dates are very uncertain, we find Homer. Homer writing his, singing about his, about the epic songs. The songs of Homer actually were generated by that time, and they began to develop. But that's a different thing. But we are gradually getting into a more civilized kind of world order, a kind of the rise of radical democracy, which was one of the priceless things contributed by the ancient Greek world to the modern period. And so therefore, let me come to Plato, because time is really running out. I could have gone on and on, but I would rather cut it short and try to size it up in whatever manner possible. So Plato was born in 427 BC. Some critics suggest that no, it's not 427 but 429. But it is related to several other empires. Actually, it is the, if you look at history from above, and if you can see the empires rising and falling, then it gives you a very curious kind of feeling. Very curious kind of feeling. Because there had been the Egyptian empire down below, just down below. You just get across the sea and you reach Egypt. That was the first recorded empire. So that was the empire. And then we find the Assyrian Empire. You come to Asia Minor, you find the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, all almost coming up together. And gradually, Persia was coming up, modern Iran. Persia was coming up as the next very important heavyweight empire. So therefore you can see that there are 4 different empires. So Egyptian empire, you cannot say that it is lost. Empires are not lost in a day, because Great Britain still is there, although it's no longer an empire. It's now Little England, but still it has some kind of importance in terms of political relations. So therefore, Egypt had been there, Assyrian Empire had been there, Babylonian Empire had been there, and gradually the rise of the Persian Empire. So we get 4 empires. And what happened, I'm not going into the details of history because there are several reasons for the gradual fall of these 4 empires. The 3 empires, the Egyptian, then the Assyrian, then the Babylonian Empire. They began to lose hold over that part of Asia and the beginning of Europe. And as a result, the Persian Empire began to rise up and began to suppress and protest against the powers of earlier empires, right? So by 550 BC, Persia became a recognized empire and a very decided, and that Persia actually was dragged on to attack Athens and begin 2 different kinds of warfares between Athens and Persia. But there was no chance. What happened, you know? It happened in 499 BC. 499 BC, and something else was happening. It was happening in Turkey. It was happening in a small city-state called Anatolia, Anatolia, Anatolia. Anatolia, it is very adjacent to Turkey. Now, Anatolia had been under the power of Persia, right? And there had been some Athenian immigrants residing in Anatolia. So therefore, they began to instigate Athens to start, or at least to help them, start a war, or at least help them against Persia, which Athens did. So Athens actually began to support the Anatolians, especially the colonizers who were Greeks. So therefore, most of them were Greeks really. However, they intervened into a very intense political situation. So Athens actually went against Persia indirectly by helping them. And Persia at that moment didn't say anything. It started in 499, the revolt of Anatolia. Anatolia revolted against Persia in 499 BC, and Athens began to support them, give them sustenance for this warfare, and Persia didn't say anything to them right now. They first of all concentrated on suppressing the revolt, and which they did in 492 BC. Right. So it was over. The Anatolia problem was over, and after 492 BC, Herodotus actually reports this. King Darius actually said, "The fire of my mind will never be extinguished until I set the city of Athens on fire." This was his statement, as Herodotus reports. So therefore, he had all this at the back of his mind. And he was thinking that he will do something against Athens. And as a result of this, this is well-known history, 490 battle and 480 battle. 490 battle is the Battle of Marathon. And you know that in this Battle of Marathon, Athens actually for this created a confederation of army. I'll talk about this later on. And as a result of this confederation of army, they could very well easily subjugate the Persian naval attack against Greece. And this was in 490 BC. And again, after 10 years, Darius' son, Xerxes, came back. And this was the Battle of Salamis. এটা একটা মাঠের মধ্যে যুদ্ধটা হয়েছিল সালামিস থেকে একটু দূরে, and it was in this battle that Aeschylus took part. However, so therefore these two battles actually resulted in the decline of Persia as an empire and the rise of Athens as an empire. A new dimension began to open up with 480 BC. So therefore, and that also could happen because of the wonderful statesmen that they had in Greece. So therefore, under their leadership, they could very properly, guide Athens into this path. Pericles, one of the very central, architects of the Athenian radical democracy, Pericles actually decided on creating, for the first time, a kind of confederation, not based on war, but based on international relations. This is something very important. So Pericles actually created this, a kind of confederation which will be based on international relations. For instance, the attack by a foreign invader, or some money matters among the city-states, or the market economy as it was there at that time. All such things will be discussed there. Very much like United Nations and all that of our recent times. And this was called the Delian League. Right? The Delian League, which was, formulated right after this.
So, why do you call that system one of radical democracy? Why the term radical?
Actually, they themselves actually use this word, radical democracy, because there had been the, radicalization of opinions. Let me then explain this. There had been, as Plato also has in book 2, is discussing what is a lie. Mithikata. When a state tells a lie, what happens? When an individual tells a lie, what happens? And what is the status of my mind, whatever I say? What is that? What is the status of that? আমি যা বলছি তার মানে কি? এটা কি সত্যি না মিথ্যে না কি? So therefore, he formulated a very wonderful term, not formulated because they are doxa, D-O-X-A. Doxa থেকে orthodoxy, heterodoxy এসব কথা এসেছে। Doxa তাহলে কি? Opinion. Doxa is opinion. মানে আমি যদি একটা কথা বলি সেটা হচ্ছে মতামত, আর যদি সবাই সেটা মেনে নেয় তাহলে সেটা হচ্ছে একটা ফান্ডামেন্টাল নিয়ম। It becomes a law, it becomes a regulation, it becomes an ideology. If I say something, it becomes just an opinion. যার জন্য নলেজের সম্পর্কে বলতে গিয়ে তাহলে এই যে ব্যাপারগুলো, that means you have to radicalize the opinions. You have to radicalize the democratic principles. না হলে তো doxa will just remain like that. And when you reach the final stage, that becomes logos, knowledge. That becomes logos. কাজে জ্ঞান কাকে বলে? এই এবং যাকে খুব সত্যি কথা ঠিক মতো অনুবাদ করলে জ্ঞান কথাটা হয় না, সেটা হচ্ছে প্রজ্ঞা। এই প্রজ্ঞা কথাটা, is the essential meaning of that. আমি কিভাবে আমার জগৎকে দেখছি, আমি কিভাবে আমার নিজেকে মেলাচ্ছি অন্যদের সাথে, এই তর্কগুলো কিন্তু সব উঠেছে বিভিন্ন প্লেটোর বিভিন্ন লেখা, একটা জায়গায় নয়। So therefore, very briefly, this is the way that we try to radicalize situations. যার জন্য আমি যদি একটা কথা বলি সেটার কোনো মানে নেই, মানে সেটা তো বাক্সা। This is just opinion. It's my opinion. It may be your opinion, it may be his opinion, but it is not collectivity. So in order to achieve collectivity, there should be radicalization. বুঝতে পেরেছেন? কালেক্টিভিটি কিন্তু অত সহজে হয় না যে সবাই মানবে, সবাই জেনে শুনে নিল, এটা হয় না unless there is the state apparatus working on this. কাজেই যে কোনো সময়তে যে আমি যে কথাটা বলছি সেটা কি সত্য, এই সত্যের কথাটা বারবার কেন আসছে? আমরা ভাবছি ফিলসফি, কিন্তু আসলে এটা পলিটিক্স। রিপাবলিক ইজ নট রিয়েলি philosophy, it's a wonderful permeation and a mix of both philosophy and political thinking. So therefore, the Delian League was formed, and it was, why was it called Delian League? Because it was the first meeting, and the headquarter was established and was held in the island called Delos, D-E-L-O-S. এই ডেলসের এগুলো খুব ছোট্ট করে বলে দিচ্ছি আমি। So the first confederation of meeting was held in Delos, but then Athens decided that it should pass over to Athens, যেটা এখন হয়েছে। যেমন প্রথম আমরা দেখতাম ভিয়েনাতে হতো, ইউএনও ইত্যাদি ইত্যাদি, তারপর সব আমেরিকাতে চলে গেছে, একই সিচুয়েশন বারবার চলছে। So therefore it's a curious and ridiculous repetition of history. So therefore, that this was happening, this confederation. Sparta for some time joined this confederation, Delian League. But later on, Sparta had certain political debates with Athens and others who joined the Delian League. So therefore, there was another league formed that was called the Peloponnesian League. A Peloponnesia মানে হচ্ছে রিজিয়নটা হচ্ছে লোয়ার পার্ট অফ গ্রিস, খুব সাধারণভাবে বলে। আর যে এই যে ডেলিয়ান লিগ যেটা বলছি, যেটা পরে অ্যাথেন্সেই চলে এসছে, সেটা হচ্ছে দ্য আপার পার্ট অফ গ্রিস। পুরো মেনল্যান্ডটায় একটা ছোট্ট ভাগ আছে, এর নিচের অংশটা হচ্ছে পেলোপনিস, যার থেকে পেলোপনেসিয়ান ওয়ার। So therefore, let us forget all about this, and then I will just say that it was a wonderful time. I'm not really sold on the idea of a golden age, because I've never seen a golden age. Because the Renaissance also is not a golden age, because I've read the history. It's not a golden age. Nowadays, nobody says that it's a golden age. It's once again a trash. There's nothing like a golden age. It was a comfortable age, that may be one of the ways that we can describe it. But it was a period of achievement that had been, it's really curious. During 19th century, একটা অদ্ভুত period of achievement came to Bengal. We find several people, all the people coming together, and now all of them are lost. ঠিক একইভাবে in ancient Athens, in 5th century BC, we find dramatists you all know, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, etc. And then the philosophers, Plato is there, Parmenides is there, Heraclitus is there, and Democritus is there, Demosthenes is there, Anaxagoras is there. So all of these people, a huge bunch of philosophers. It was a period of philosophy. It was a period of philosophy. That means it is a period of critiquing. It was a period of critiquing. They have been critiquing the situation, the social and political situation of the time, all of them. And there have been also orators. I'll talk about later on if time permits. Isocrates, for instance. Isocrates was one of the most important orators. And then Antiphon, Lysias, all of them have been there. And two of them had been the teachers of Plato. I clearly remember having read somewhere, at least yes, Anaxagoras and Parmenides very definitely had been one of his teachers, Plato's teachers. Now, Plato actually can be situated in a very important place, but before that, let me tell you about the tragic end of Athens. In fact, you know that the two leagues, I talked about the two leagues, the Confederation of Army and Confederation of Political Situations. So on the one hand, we have the Delian League, and on the other hand, the Peloponnesian League. And Parthia was still at the back. Parthia was initiating Sparta to enter into a warfare with Athens, so that then Parthia and Sparta will join hands and will create an empire. Maybe a Greco-Persian empire. That's what they have been envisioning, for instance, at that time. And this battle started and continued for a long time. Yes, and it started in 395 BC and continued up to 386 BC, quite a long time. No, I'm sorry, 431 BC to 404 BC, because 30 years actually continued. And the Battle of Nautium, this is considered to be the end of Athens' rivalry against Sparta. And normally in history books we read that Athens was defeated by Sparta, and it started the decline and the tragic fall of Athens, and it was destroyed militarily, politically, socially. Something remained in terms of culture. This is the normal description that we find. But it is not really true. There was no winner, no loser. Actually, normally you will say that Battle of Nautium ended this, but it never really ended. Because after this, Parthia found that Sparta is not coming to give him any kind of advantage. So the battle started between Parthia and Sparta. And this continued for a long time, from 395 to 386 BC. And then again, after the end of this battle, another battle started between Parthia and Thebes, and it was fought in 371 BC. And in this way, Sparta completely went out of history. So you can see that it was really a tragic phase of human history. It's not the history of Sparta or Athens, but it is the tragic debacle for mankind, that they destroyed themselves, right, and never to rise up again. As you know what is happening in contemporary Greece. They could never really rise up, and with Alexander's invasion, who was considered to be an outsider, not a Greek. Amra ekhon boli Greek, but he was not considered by the mainland Greeks as a Greek person. He was actually a Macedonian. And Macedonia at that time was considered to be something else, right? Not part of mainland Greece. So with the initiative, with the battle between Alexander's army and the city-states of Greece, Athens was completely destroyed, so was all other city-states. But that is not part of our discussion. Now, after this Peloponnesian War, they had been experimenting with the political system. And that's why they actually created a kind of system with 30 tyrants. What's the meaning of tyrants? Kings. যার জন্য কিং এডিপাস মানেটা আমরা অরিজিনাল গ্রিকে কিন্তু ইডিপাস টিরানুস meaning Oedipus king. It was really king, and as you know that the idea of a king is associated with torture, oppression, so that's why a degeneration of meaning of the word tyrants. So therefore it was the reign of 30 tyrants, meaning 30 kings, with council of 500. Later on it was extended up to 5,000, because everybody was running either for power or for money. And this was a terrible situation that actually took place in Athens. And at the same time, I must say something about Plato's family. Plato's father and Plato's mother. Plato's father was Ariston, and Ariston actually claimed that he belonged to the royal family of Athens and Messana. So he had a royal heritage that he used to claim. And his mother, Parilampis, she also was very, very close to some of the members of the 30 tyrants. So when Plato was given the option to take up a profession, natural choice would have been politics. Because he was, from his father's side, this was his stepfather, of course, Ariston. His father died early. Through Ariston, he could have access to many noble families, and then through his mother, he could very easily be inducted into some of the important position of the 30 tyrants. So naturally he had a very distinctive political option. But it was really ill-fated that he got close to Socrates. And I'm not going to give the details of Socrates' death, that will take a class. So therefore Socrates actually was killed rather, not died. In fact, he in fact got in touch with Socrates, and Socrates actually was a speaking philosopher. খুব ভালো একটা কথা বলেছে যে সেফালস, যার বাড়িতে গেছে সেফালাস রিপাবলিকে প্রথমেই শুরু হচ্ছে যখন তোমরা পড়বে, সেখানে সেটা কথা আমি পরে বলছি, সেখানে একটা কথা আছে বলছে যে আই এম অ্যান ওল্ড ম্যান and I don't have any other pleasures. Why I have the pleasures of conversation. Right? The idea of conversation as a means of pleasure. And this is the kind of technique that actually Plato is following all the time in all his dialogues. Right? In dialogue after dialogue, he's using that pleasure of conversation. That's an art of conversation. So therefore, Plato actually got very, very dissatisfied and also depressed and threatened by the death of Socrates, by the killing of Socrates. It was a mock trial, as you know, and after this, actually there were 3 distinctive charges brought against Socrates, that he worships strange gods, that he corrupts the young, and that he raises revolt against the existing system. These were the 3 charges brought against him. And as a result of that, he was put to death. He should welcome death by thinking hemlock. I'm not going into the details of that because that's not important for us. So therefore, Plato, for a time, actually left Athens and went to different other places, especially Asia Minor, and then Egypt. That's an apocryphal story. Maybe he was sold as a slave in Egypt, and some of his disciples suddenly found Socrates, Plato standing there, and once again brought him back to Greece. I'm not sure about that, the certainty of that story, But what happened, you know, he actually was not depressed with any individual. He was depressed with the system. He was depressed with a kind of system, and he knew that this system will not continue for long. And that was the system of the 30 tyrants, etc. So all these experiments that have been going on every day, right? So therefore, he decided to devise a policy. যদিও এই পলিসি বলার অনেক মুশকিল আছে, এই পলিসি বলতে গিয়ে তাকে জেলেও চলে যেতে হয়, এরকমও আমরা জানি ল্যাটিন হিস্ট্রি পড়ে দেখা যায়। সেনেকা ফর ইনস্টেন্স, আরও অনেকে আছে। So therefore, you know, that he left Athens, and when after a long time he came back, he found an invitation from one of his friends who was also a disciple of Socrates. His name was Dion, D-I-O-N. Now, Dion actually came from Asia Minor. তখন তার এশিয়া মাইনরে অনেক ছোট ছোট রাজ্য গড়ে উঠল। এই আজকে গড়ে উঠলো, 20 বছর পরে শেষ হয়ে গেল, আবার 10 বছরে ফিনিশড। There were some such small kingdoms coming up, and these were not very large kingdoms. They were very small, maybe consisting of 5-6 villages, like zamindars. Now, his uncle, Dion's uncle, Dionysius II, was the king of a particular place in Syracuse. And Dion invited Plato to experiment with his idea of a perfect republic. He went there. And now this, we must say a few words about Dionysius II. Dionysius II was actually an apprehensive person. All the time suspecting certain things, some kind of conspiracy going on. And when Plato was advising him on how to develop a perfect political system, he began to suspect Plato. And also Dion. He thought that Dion would usurp and be the king himself. That's why he has brought Plato here. And as a result, Dion was exiled and Plato was under confinement, and after a lot of convincing and persuasion, he was got free and he came back to Greece to establish without which you would never perhaps remember him, his academy. This academy was established in 385 BC. It was a tremendous achievement, and this continued till 529 BC. And finally the Roman Empire, in 529 BC, Roman Emperor Justinian the First actually announced that there is an encouragement to pagan studies in that academy, so it should be closed down. Once again, the statecraft actually intervenes and it was shut down. So this is a tragic history of the academy as well. But I will just say certain things about Plato's The Republic, and if you begin to read the Republic, I should always ask you, or if you want to teach the Republic also, then I ask you to read first of all the first 2-3 pages, because that is very important. And yes, Bendis is the local name, and she is worshipped there with lots of enthusiasm. It's a local, sort of. যেমন বাঁকুড়ায় অনেক বিভিন্ন ধরনের ছোট ছোট পুজো আছে, যেমন ধর্ম ঠাকুরের পুজো আমরা তো বিশেষ জানি না, কিন্তু এসব বিষয়ে অনেক জায়গায় হয় এবং অনেক বহু রকম পুজো আছে। It is a kind of local worship, and many people from outside also used to participate in this. So it was a huge festival. Now, scene is like this. Yes, Socrates has come to Piraeus to see the festival in the daytime. So he has done with it, and with him is there a person called Glaucon, Glaucon. Glaucon actually is introduced in the text as the son of Aristotle, but actually he is the brother of Plato. So Glaucon is there, and then there is Socrates. So Socrates says, well, we have seen everything. The festival is really very good, a different kind of festival. We have never seen such a festival. So, however, let us now make a move to our home. So that is the end. That seems that this is the end of their experience of the festival. In a way, that is the end of their experience, because nothing else is written in the book. So then when they were just starting to leave, then a servant comes running after them. Is the servant of Polycharmus. Polycharmus actually was a disciple of Socrates. So Polycharmus comes up and says, well, Socrates, why are you leaving? I have seen you that you were just leaving the festival. He says, yes, I have seen everything. So there's nothing more to see. So naturally I'm leaving. I always want to go home early. And then he said, but you should not leave now. You should wait for the torch race. What kind of torch race? It's a different kind of torch race. Torch race on horseback. It's a different kind of torch race we have never seen in Athens. So he says, but where should I stay? He says, well, my house is a large villa, so you can stay there. And my father, who was your friend but is now very old, wants to see you. So that's why, and there are lots of young people coming up there on this occasion of the festival. So let us go and talk and discuss, and then come back again at night to see the torch race. That's the nocturnal torch race. So Socrates says, well, yes, let us go. Then they go to the house of Cephalus. Cephalus কথাটার মানে কিন্তু আমরা মাথা. So he is the head of the family, but Cephalus actually is a Greek god also, father of some kind of relation is there with Odysseus. However, so he goes there inside and begins their conversation. And there Cephalus says, nothing pleases me now like the pleasure of conversation. Right, this begins the conversation. Actually, conversation means what? He again and again discusses that. It first begins with, I'm sorry to tell you that it begins with gerontology, lots of talk about old age and the problems of old age and active aging and all that. And then after that, it begins with, the art of conversation. Now, I don't want to go into the details of the things which will be, I'm sure, to the students by the teacher. That means the three charges, right? So I don't want to go into the three charges. The emotional charge, the moral charge, and the intellectual charge. I don't want to go into that. But rather, I want to explore the idea of knowledge that Plato talks about. Now, Plato's basic contention in the book, as we know, is justice. As you all know, any student of literature knows that he problematizes the idea of justice, deity. But how can justice be achieved? And who can execute justice? So that means there is a relation between Dike and Tyrannus. There is a very definitive relationship between the two. Because the Tyrannus will decide what is justice and what is injustice. So that means the very identity of the Tyrannus is questioned. Isn't that so? Because Tyrannus cannot be above everyone. So that's why the idea of knowledge becomes very important. So if the Tyrannus is not a combination of the, as the Greeks call it, arete, A-R-E-T-E, virtue, honesty, etc., plus logos, knowledge. Now, how can knowledge be achieved? This is the central question that he actually initiates. So therefore he says that in order to bring justice, কারণ ওটা হচ্ছে একদম শেষের কথা, মানে আমাদের বানানো একটু কথা, সেটা হচ্ছে যে a philosopher must be a king or a king must be a philosopher, sort of trash. But that is not the exact thing. Actually he is after formulating a proper kind of knowledge. Without this knowledge, it is very difficult. So he said that knowledge may be of two kinds. Knowledge may be physical knowledge, যেটাকে আমরা বলতে পারি যে sensationist form of knowledge. Knowledge of the body. এটা হচ্ছে
knowledge
of the body
or acquired through the body.
Knowledge of the body মানে ওই যে acquired through the body, that you can gather in the gymnasium. Your body is framed and with a perfect body you can approach the world. যার জন্য তোমরা দেখবে architectural side, they actually make a kind of appreciation and adoration of the human body, right? Because of that. So therefore that is one form of knowledge. That means it is merely physical knowledge, right? Or this kind of knowledge may have, should have also a very distinctive limitation. Because you cannot know everything. Because the idea of the body is finite. It can never be infinite. So that's why he suggests that the knowledge that we experience is the perfect form of knowledge. আমরা লকের বলবো আগেই কিন্তু এটা করছি. He says the wearer knows where the shoe pinches. তার মানে হচ্ছে the maker's knowledge and the user's knowledge. এই দুটো form of knowledge Plato develops. Plato says that there is the user's knowledge and there is the maker's knowledge. যেমন ধরুন মেকার হচ্ছে একটা টেবিল বানাবে, সে বললো যে খুব ভালো টেবিলটা আপনি নিয়ে যান, এসব আমি নিয়ে এলাম. He has a knowledge, he knows how to make it, he has made the table. So there are two forms of knowledge, the maker's knowledge and the user's knowledge. So therefore I was giving the idea of a table because that's a very favorite of Plato himself, the idea of a bed and a table. So therefore the maker has made the table and thinks that it is perfect, but I'm using it. When I'm using it, I'm also gathering my knowledge of it. Because as a user, I know whether if it's really perfect. Right? আমি যখন ব্যবহার করতে শুরু করলাম, then I find that there are some problems with the table. So that's why Plato prioritizes user's knowledge over the maker's knowledge. This is the point of departure between Plato and Aristotle. সেটা আমরা পরে দেখব. So therefore he thinks that user's knowledge is more important than the maker's knowledge. Right? Now if you try to consider this as a metonymic projection, then you can relate this to the social system. Because Plato's main contention was not at all poetry. He was not bothered with that. His main contention was the Athenian society and the protection of Athenian society against declining momentum. So therefore, he tries to suggest that these 30 tyrants, this kind of political rule that is going on, is nothing but the maker's knowledge. This is maker's knowledge. And the people who are trying to implement these, principles, have the user's knowledge. They only know whether this will work or not. Right? As a result of this, philosophically, the question of lie comes up. That the maker, is he telling us the truth or not? So knowledge therefore leads to truth. If knowledge is acceptable, then it gradually is upgraded to the level of truth. এখন প্রশ্নটা হচ্ছে যে whether he is saying the truth properly or not, is he really telling us the truth? যার জন্য এই যে লেখে আলেখের কোয়েশ্চেন আমি বারবার করে আলোচনা করতে খুব ব্রিফলি আমার এমএ ক্লাসে বর্ধমান বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়। অ্যাকচুয়ালি what is লেখে and what is আলেখে? This actually relates to a complete myth. After death, the soul passes into a cave, the cave of oblivion, where truth obliterates, where falsehood obliterates. So it is this cave of consciousness, where we can only formulate the nature of truth. But the maker's knowledge has given us a truth, a form of truth. It is a form of truth, of course. Because they think that it is this way that they will be able to upgrade Athens. They will be able to achieve democracy in whatever form possible. But again, there is the user's knowledge. People who are using it, the kind of system, the kind of ideas, the kind of thoughts which have been put into this are now experimented with by those who use it. So therefore, actually Plato finds that there is a clear-cut dialecticism in this. On the one hand, the maker's knowledge, on the other hand, the user's knowledge. And this initiates the long history of dialectics, starting with Plato, probably ending with Hegel. Even more than that, but that actually is the last point, Hegel. So therefore, this Plato's main contention is therefore the idea of knowledge, logos, and the idea of truth, which ultimately he tries to decipher, but it is very difficult to decipher. You remember the kind of metaphor that he has given in Book 10 of the Republic, that wonderful idea of the bed and the table and all that, and also the projection of the human soul, the transmigration of human soul, etc. Everything he speaks of, but I must mention that this last part of the Republic, Book 10, actually is definitely a result from his close connection with Pythagoras. Either the critics are divided. Some say that he met Pythagoras when he left Athens. Actually, he met Pythagoras. And Pythagoras was completely immersed in the Oriental mystical philosophy. And critics, the opinion that the critics are divided actually in this. They say that either he met Pythagoras directly, or maybe there was a school of Pythagoras going on, and he met some of the disciples of Pythagoras. from there we find that Plato came back with a kind of permeation of the East and the West. It's for the first time that we find a kind of, permeation, kind of mix-up of the East as well as the West. So from the Western tradition had very much been there because he was quite well trained in the Western philosophy. But at the same time, he came back with the mystical philosophy. As a result of this, we find the idea of a sort of transmigration of soul, at the same time the philosophical tradition of being and becoming, etc. So this actually is the result of that Oriental transaction. It is very readily agreed upon by the existing critics. So whatever that may be one of the ways through which we can approach Plato. But Plato's real problem was to do this. Now, if you read Plato's The Republic, then I ask you to look at the last part of the third book of the Republic. প্রথমে তো বলছে যে there are some emotional charges, excess of laughter, excess of emotions, all that. And he says that I disapprove of all this. That's fine. And then it brings about the moral charge, that he gives a mean view of gods and heroes and all that. Gods and heroes should not be presented in this light because it is a derogatory projection of the great gods and the great heroes whom all the Greeks worship. So it's actually he was doing all this. Now a central question comes up. এখানে আমি এগুলো নিয়ে আর ডিসকাস করছি না, এগুলো the assigned teacher will talk about this to the students, but I will just refer to one point. Why is he so much against Homer? যা কিছু পড়া দেখানো হচ্ছে, everywhere he is citing Homer, that Homer is saying this, Homer is doing that. Personally, he has nothing against Homer because he has said again and again that Homer is one of our greatest poets. But still, he is again and again talking against Homer all the while. এটার উত্তর তো সবারই জানা থাকার কথা। Actually, দুটো কথা বলে exactly. Actually, Homer's epic, Iliad, not Odyssey, Iliad, most of the examples are taken over from Homer. Most of the examples. Now, what was the syllabus of that time? এখানে I will bring up the rhetoricians, the orators of the time. যে সম্পর্কে there are several discussions on oratory. Antony's speech. What happens there? It's nothing but the isocratian politics that is creating there. Friends, Romans and countrymen, he begins on a very low key, and then Brutus is an honorable person, etc., and all that, and then gradually he actually escalates the tone of the speech, and finally he begins to speak in such a manner that a revolt is going to be initiated. So that is oratory. That is the kind of art of persuasion. So that's why you know that even in the Elizabethan period, they used to follow. They are well trained in this. তোমরা যদি হেরোডোটাসের লেখা পড়ো, মানে if any of you actually read Herodotus's writings, or even some of them are cited by Longinus on the Sublime, then you will be able to know the range, the way in which they used to influence the people. For instance, Athens decided on attacking a colony called Cheronia, near Sicily. At that time, the Greek general gave a speech for it. He gave such a speech that all the soldiers, knowing full well, Herodotus himself says that it was sheer defeat for the Athenians, but they were encouraged by such oratory, and they went to the battle and died. Right? So there are several such examples, and Plato calls it falsehood. Oratory is nothing but falsehood. And when Homer is cited, I'm encouraging a lethe. I'm encouraging lethe, L-E-T-H-E, and the lethe words had some. Lethe means falsehood, mythe, lie. So therefore, if I want to encourage the guardians of the city to be cherishing truth and knowledge, then we should do away with such things, which are contained in Homer. Right? So anti-oratorical stance. This is one reason. And the second reason, as Oyon has already pointed out, the second reason is history. It was very much there in the school syllabus. তখনকার দিনে কিন্তু পড়াশোনাটা খুব আমাদের মনে করলে চলবে না, একই রকম পড়াশোনা, ভালো পড়াশোনা। আমাদের যেটা হয়েছে সেটা হচ্ছে we have only enriched ourselves in technology. But it's not that we have just, and we have come to know the world better. We have come to know the world better because we have so many other, instruments to properly situate ourselves in this world. But it's not that they were deficient in any way. If we consider the curriculum of that time, then we find that Homer was a central text. Now, why was Homer as poetry? No, not in the poetry syllabus, not in literature discipline. Homer was a resource book of history. যার কারণটা এখানে বলতে গেলে এক সপ্তাহ লেগে যাবে, অনেক কথা বলতে হয়। আমি খুব একটা লাইনে বলছি, দুটো লাইনে বলছি। সেটা হচ্ছে যে it is believed that Homer records the tragic history of the Battle of Troy, thereby positing the idea, thereby negating the idea that it was a battle fought for Helen. There's nothing like this. It was actually a pan-Hellenic attack against Troy to save their country from the Dorians. This is the truth. And that's why Homer was actually archiving history. Homer actually was archiving history. And that archival of history should not give you any false information. Right? And moreover, you must remember সেই যুগের কথা, naturally they used to believe all this to be true, that there are gods and goddesses, that there are great heroes, that there were great heroes like these Theseus, etc., etc. All of them existed. They were actually real people for them, and the gods were real for them. So that's why Homer is disparaging all such things, the gods, the heroes, and all that. They're behaving like human beings. That also gives us a separate kind of criticism of this. But however, so Homer is history. So Homer's history should be cleansed and should be given a perspective. That is his prescription. His prescription is briefly this, that Homer's history should be rewritten. এই কথাটা বললাম এইটুকুর জন্যই যে I will try to very briefly talk about the narrative, Plato's discussion of the narrative. কারণ এই দুটো যে চার্জেসগুলো আছে এগুলো খুব সাধারণ কথা, এগুলো আমরা সবাই জানি, that there were 3 charges. But what I find very interesting is his discussion on the narrative and his monophonic narrative and the polyphonic narrative. This is something that he initiates in the 5th century BC, long before such Bhaktis and others. Right? So therefore, what he says here, again, Homer. That's why people say that Plato is pro-epic and Aristotle is pro-drama. Because you will find the examples. You find it very clearly in examples. Now, what happens, is in the narrative, he takes up the first book and the first few lines. The first few lines of Homer's Iliad. Now what happens there? There we find that the priest of Apollo, his daughter has been taken away by the Greeks, and Agamemnon thinks that they should not return the daughter of the priest, and as a result the priest actually is a worshipper of Apollo, as I say, prays to Apollo, and Apollo then decides that he will destroy the Greeks by shooting arrows at them. That's why it begins in that way. For 10 days, in this way it begins. For 10 days Apollo has been shooting arrows against the Greek camps. What happens? Plato says that this is, even here, which voice should we listen to? এগুলো কিন্তু সবই interrelated. The knowledge, the truth. Truth has a single voice. Knowledge has a single voice. So which voice should I listen to? I listen to multiple voices. But this is not the voice that I expect. Of the voice. And if we can't properly identify the voice, then we miss the truth. This is his very simple, question. So he interrogates the idea of the voice, and he says that every narrative should have a monophonic voice. Every narrative. সেটা আমরা মানব কি মানব না সেটা আলাদা কথা, but he discusses this way. Now he opposes the polyphonic voices. কেন অপোজ করছেন? Because it opposes truth, because it opposes knowledge, because knowledge is always one, truth is always one, and if we get many voices, what should I accept? I've been given now many options, and as a listener, I am somehow intrigued by so many voices coming up. So that's why this is perhaps the first case of rewriting. He rewrites the first few pages of Homer's Iliad. If you look at the text, you will see that he says, well, let me try to rewrite this beginning of Homer's Iliad. And he begins to rewrite. A long quotation begins. And that is by Plato himself. So Plato says it is here that we can hear only one voice. That means the truth is conveyed to me. Otherwise, if Agamemnon says that if I accept Agamemnon, or should I accept Achilles, or should I accept Nestor, whom should I accept? Or the priest of Apollo. So this is how he says that Homer actually confuses the truth. The same thing happens. যার জন্য অনেকে ঠিক এগুলো বুঝতে পারে না যে কেন প্লেটো এটাকে অপোজ করছে, why is he opposing this? Because these are interrelated. তার কারণ হচ্ছে in most of the cases we don't read book 1 and book 2 and then come to book 3. We start with book 3. And that actually generates the problem, because earlier he has already discussed all this. And then as a continuation, he begins all this. So therefore, even in his discussion on music and rhythm, you will find the same kind of problem. Again, the polyphonic music. He therefore goes against the many-stringed lyres, and he goes against the words with multiple shades of meaning. He goes against the different forms of music coming from different tribes. For instance, the Ionian music, the Lydian music, the Phrygian music, etc. There are as many as 4 or 5 different kinds of music, and Dorian music, of course. So there are at least 4 options, and mixed Lydian also is there. Some mixed are there. So all of these, then he isolates only 2 of them. Right? One for the peacetime and normal situation, another for wartime or any other situation which requires that kind of music. So that's why his discussion on narrative, on music, on the choice of rhythm, on the choice of diction, in all of these, he is actually trying to connect the discussion with this earlier discussion of knowledge and truth. So that's why truth can be multi-pronged. Truth is one. And that is the same kind of problem that is, flowing into the 10th book, where he discusses truth and all that. So therefore, we find that Plato, knowingly or unknowingly, creates a history of dialecticism. The kind of dialecticism which is very clearly apparent, যেটা খুব পরিষ্কারভাবে আমাদের উনি দেখিয়ে দিচ্ছেন in the last book of the Republic, in the book 10, the world of being and the world of becoming. That actually is a simplistic method of presenting the dialectic, the being and the becoming. But he, in fact, is trying to correlate all of these problems to his contemporary socio-political system. Because the society is collapsing, the political system is declining, and his intention is to bring back the earlier glory of Athens by, again, bringing back justice or dialogue. So if you have to do that, then you have to discuss all of these. So this is how he is discussing different problems, and I believe that I will not have much time now, because I thought that I would be able to say something about Aristotle, but today I have to once again get back. But well, I'm open to take some questions if you have it.